My brother told everyone I stole Grandma's inheritance. Grandma left behind one final letter. The first time my brother accused me of stealing our grandmother's inheritance, he did it before the flowers from her funeral had begun to wilt. He stood at the head of her dining table, placed both hands on the polished walnut, and told 15 members of our family that I had manipulated a dying woman into changing her will. He had printed copies of bank statements, highlighted transfers in yellow, and arranged them beside each plate as if betrayal were the evening's main course. By midnight, my aunts had stopped answering my calls, my cousins had removed me from the family group chat, and my mother had asked me to return the key to Grandma Rose's house. What none of them knew was that Grandma had anticipated every accusation. 3 days before she died, she had sealed one final letter inside a blue envelope and given it to someone no one in the family knew she trusted. That letter would eventually be read aloud in the same dining room where my brother destroyed my name. It would reveal that he was right about one thing. Money had been disappearing from my grandmother's accounts. He was simply wrong about who had taken it. My name is Elena Mercer, and for most of my life, I was the dependable child in a family that rewarded performance. My older brother Daniel understood that difference long before I did. He remembered birthdays, delivered charming speeches at holiday dinners, and appeared in photographs with his arm around whichever relative mattered most at the time. I remembered medication schedules, repaired loose cabinet hinges, and drove people to appointments they preferred not to mention. Daniel was admired because his care was visible. Mine was useful, which meant it became expected. Grandma Rose was the only person who seemed to understand the cost of that arrangement. She never praised me for being selfless. She asked whether anyone was taking care of me. When I laughed and changed the subject, she would look at me over the rim of her teacup with the patient expression of someone who knew I was lying. Grandma had built a life that looked modest from the outside. She lived in the same brick house for 52 years, wore cardigans until the elbows thinned, and kept rubber bands in a ceramic bowl because throwing them away seemed wasteful. Our family spoke of her as comfortable, never wealthy. My grandfather had owned a regional printing company, but it had been sold after his death, and everyone assumed the proceeds had been divided among investments, charitable gifts, and ordinary retirement expenses. Daniel paid closer attention. He worked in commercial real estate and had a talent for estimating value from fragments. He noticed that Grandma never worried about rising property taxes. He knew she had maintained accounts with 2 private banks. He once told me, after too much wine, that old people who lived cheaply often died rich. I began helping Grandma regularly after she fell in her garden. I was 31 then, newly separated from a fiancé who had decided my availability to everyone else meant I would never fully belong to him. Grandma fractured her wrist, not her hip, but the accident frightened her. I started visiting on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Tuesdays became Thursdays too, and within a year I was there most evenings. I worked remotely as a compliance analyst for a healthcare company, so I could take her to cardiology appointments, organize insurance forms, and argue with pharmacies. I did not move into her house, despite what Daniel later claimed. I kept my apartment 20 minutes away because Grandma insisted that care should not erase the caregiver. She paid a professional aide for weekday mornings and reimbursed my gas only after threatening to hide cash in my coat. Daniel visited in bursts. He might vanish for 6 weeks, then arrive with imported pastries and a photographer's instinct for timing. He posted a picture on social media for Grandma's 91st birthday with a caption about the woman who had taught him everything. He left before the dishes were washed. Grandma watched his car disappear and asked me to put the untouched pastries in the freezer. She loved him, but love had not made her blind. She kept a small notebook in the drawer beside her chair. At first, I assumed it contained grocery lists. Later, I learned she recorded every visit, every financial question, and every promise people made when they thought she would forget. Her health declined slowly until it did not. A minor infection became a hospital admission. The hospital stay led to weakness, the weakness to a rehabilitation facility, and the facility to a new diagnosis of vascular dementia. The word frightened everyone, but the neurologist was careful. Grandma had mild impairment. She lost names occasionally and became confused when tired. Yet she remained capable of understanding her finances and making decisions. She could explain her holdings more clearly than most of us could explain our mortgages. Daniel heard only the word dementia. Within a week, he began telling relatives that Grandma was no longer herself. That was when the first strange transaction appeared. I reviewed her monthly statements because she asked me to check recurring charges. A transfer of $18,000 had gone from one of her savings accounts to a company called Northline Advisory Group. Grandma did not recognize the name. The bank confirmed that the transfer had been authorized online, using her credentials and a verification code sent to her phone. Her phone had been with her at the rehabilitation facility, locked in a bedside drawer, except during the afternoon Daniel visited alone. I did not accuse him. That decision later kept him out of prison longer than it should have. I wanted an innocent explanation, and families trained dependable daughters to search for one. Daniel said Grandma had agreed to invest in a property fund he managed with a partner. He produced a one-page subscription document bearing her signature. Grandma stared at it for a long time. The signature resembled hers, but the date fell during a week when her right hand had been swollen from an intravenous line. She said she remembered Daniel discussing an investment, but she had refused. Daniel smiled as though her uncertainty proved his point. I contacted her attorney, Samuel Green, without telling anyone. Samuel had represented Grandma for almost 30 years. He met us at her house, asked me to wait in the kitchen, and spent an hour speaking with her alone. Afterward, he told me only that Grandma understood her circumstances and had given him instructions. 2 weeks later, she revoked the financial power of attorney that named Daniel as alternate agent and appointed a licensed fiduciary named Priya Shah. I was not given control. That detail never mattered to the family once Daniel began his campaign. In his version, I had seized everything. The transfers continued in smaller amounts: $9,000, $12,500, a payment to a contractor for renovations at a condominium Grandma did not own. Priya froze online access and ordered a forensic review. Daniel reacted before anyone informed him officially, which told me he had been monitoring more than he admitted. He called our mother and said I had convinced strangers to lock him out of his grandmother's life. By the next morning, 3 relatives had called Grandma to warn her about me. She listened without defending me. At first, that hurt. Then she explained that people reveal more when they believe their story is working. Grandma's final months were shaped by 2 parallel realities. In one, she was a frail old woman whose memory failed and whose granddaughter controlled her. In the other, she was conducting the last careful audit of her life. Priya traced the payments. Samuel reviewed deeds, trusts, and corporate records. Grandma asked me questions that seemed casual: whether Daniel had ever borrowed my laptop, whether my mother had requested copies of her identification, whether I remembered where Grandpa kept old partnership agreements. I answered without understanding the full design. She told me not to confront anyone. Truth, she said, needed a structure strong enough to survive the people who disliked it. Her estate was more complicated than any of us knew. Grandpa's printing company had not simply been sold. Part of it had been converted into shares in the logistics corporation that acquired it. Those shares multiplied through mergers. Grandma also owned 3 commercial properties through a holding company and a collection of municipal bonds accumulated over decades. Her net worth was just over $14 million. Daniel discovered enough of this to become impatient. He had overextended himself on a luxury development called Halcyon Ridge. Sales were slow, lenders were nervous, and his personal guarantees were larger than his equity. Grandma's money was not sentimental to him. It was oxygen. She died early on a Thursday morning, with rain tapping the bedroom windows. I had spent the night in the chair beside her bed. Her breathing changed just before dawn, and the hospice nurse told me the end was close. I held her hand. There was no final dramatic speech. She opened her eyes once, squeezed my fingers, and looked toward the blue hydrangeas on the wallpaper. Then she was gone. Grief did not arrive as a wave. It arrived as silence after months of listening for her. Daniel came 40 minutes later, though I had not yet called him. He said our mother had told him hospice believed the time was near. He went directly to Grandma's desk. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was looking for her burial instructions. The folder containing those instructions was clearly labeled in the kitchen cabinet, and he knew that. I stood in the doorway until he left the desk. He glanced at the locked lower drawer and then at me. That look became the first memory I distrusted. The funeral was elegant because Grandma had planned it herself. She chose white roses, a string quartet, and a reading about the measure of a life being what remained in others. Daniel delivered the eulogy. He spoke beautifully about Sunday breakfasts, Grandpa's printing press, and Grandma's fierce independence. He cried at precisely the right moment. I sat in the front pew, feeling as if I were watching an actor play my brother. After the burial, he embraced me where everyone could see and whispered that we needed to discuss what I had done. The formal will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday, but Daniel did not wait. On Sunday evening, he summoned the family to Grandma's house, saying there was urgent evidence that assets had been stolen. I arrived because my mother begged me to come and clear things up. The dining room smelled of lilies and furniture polish. Daniel had placed the bank statements around the table. The highlighted transactions included not only the payments to Northline, but also checks Grandma had written to me over 3 years. Most were reimbursements for medical equipment, home repairs, groceries, and the professional aid. One check for $40,000 was real and personal. Grandma had given it to me for the down payment on my apartment after my separation. Daniel circled it in red. He presented a story simple enough to be irresistible. I had isolated Grandma, convinced her that Daniel was stealing, installed outsiders to control her accounts, and then paid myself under the label of caregiving. He claimed the Northline transfers were fabricated to frame him. He said Grandma's dementia made any recent legal changes invalid. He had already retained an estate litigator. He intended to challenge the will before hearing it. I tried to explain that I never had access to initiate transfers and that Priya could prove it. Daniel interrupted with dates, screenshots, and the confidence of someone who had rehearsed. My mother asked why Grandma had written me $40,000. I told the truth. She looked wounded, not because Grandma had helped me, but because she had not known. Aunt Linda asked how much I expected to inherit. I said I did not know. Daniel laughed and told them I knew exactly. The worst part was not his accusation. It was watching uncertainty settle into familiar faces. People who had seen me miss holidays to care for Grandma began rearranging those absences into evidence of secret access. Cousins remembered that I had known her doctors. An aunt recalled seeing me carry files. My reliability, once convenient, became suspicious. By the end of the evening, my mother asked for the house key. I placed it on the table. Daniel reached for it, but she took it first. The will reading 2 days later seemed designed to confirm every fear. Samuel gathered us in his conference room. Grandma left specific gifts to charities, friends, and longtime employees from Grandpa's company. She left my mother an income trust, protecting her from creditors. She left Daniel $200,000, contingent on his providing a complete accounting of every transaction between himself, his companies, and Grandma. She left me the house, her personal property, and the residue of the estate after taxes and gifts. The residue was expected to exceed $10 million. My mother made a sound as though struck. Daniel did not react at first. Then he asked Samuel when the will had been signed. 8 months earlier, Samuel said, after 2 independent physicians evaluated Grandma's capacity. Daniel stood and called the document a fraud. He said I had stolen not only money, but our grandmother's mind. Samuel remained calm. He explained that the estate expected a challenge and had preserved extensive evidence. Daniel looked at me and promised that everyone would learn what I was. Within 48 hours, his accusation escaped the family. Someone sent an anonymous email to my employer alleging elder financial abuse. Daniel posted a carefully worded statement online about protecting vulnerable seniors from coercion. He did not name me, but relatives filled the gap in comments. A local business blog connected the story to Halcyon Ridge and described him as a grieving grandson seeking justice. My employer placed me on paid leave while compliance reviewed whether I had disclosed a potential conflict. The irony of being a compliance analyst accused of fraud was not lost on anyone. I wanted Samuel to release everything immediately. He refused. The estate's evidence, he said, had to be introduced through the proper process. If we fought a public relations war, Daniel would claim the legal record had been contaminated. Priya agreed. She gave me a binder showing that I had never been an authorized signer and that every reimbursement matched receipts. It was enough to reassure my employer eventually, but not enough to defeat the larger lie. The Northline transfers appeared to have been made from Grandma's devices. Daniel's name was nowhere on the transaction record. The lawsuit arrived the next week. Daniel alleged undue influence, lack of capacity, forgery, and conversion of assets. My mother joined as an interested party, though she later insisted she had not understood the filing. His attorneys requested my emails, bank statements, medical communications, and location history. They questioned the $40,000 gift and every meal I bought near Grandma's house. Grief became discovery. Private years of care were converted into exhibits by people searching for motive. I nearly settled. Daniel offered to withdraw his public accusations if I agreed to divide the estate equally among him, my mother, and me. My share would still have been more money than I had imagined owning. Samuel told me the decision was mine. Priya said nothing. That night, I went to Grandma's empty house and sat in her chair. The lower drawer of her desk was still locked, but Samuel had inventoried it. It contained tax returns, property records, and the little notebook of visits. I read pages of Grandma's tight handwriting. Beside Daniel's visits were questions: asked about trust, wanted account balance, took phone to fix settings, angry when refused loan. Beside mine were ordinary notes: Elena brought soup, Elena tired, remind her life is not debt. At the back of the notebook she had written one sentence twice: do not buy peace with the person selling the war. I rejected the settlement. Daniel escalated. He hired a publicist, produced statements from relatives claiming Grandma had been confused, and arranged for a former aide to say I restricted visitors. The aide had worked for us for 12 days and had been dismissed after repeatedly arriving late. Her statement omitted that. My mother gave a deposition in which she said Grandma once forgot my name. Under questioning, she admitted it happened after pain medication following surgery. Context disappeared in headlines but remained in transcripts, and Samuel told me transcripts mattered more. The first break came from a detail Daniel considered harmless. During discovery, his attorneys produced messages intended to show Grandma trusted him financially. One message contained a photograph of an investment proposal displayed on her tablet. The image metadata placed the photograph at Grandma's house on the same afternoon as the first Northline transfer. In the reflection on the tablet screen, barely visible, was Daniel's watch and the sleeve of his gray suit. That did not prove he initiated the transfer, but it proved he had access to the device at the relevant time. Priya's forensic accountant dug deeper. Grandma's phone had backed up automatically to a cloud account. Deleted messages showed repeated verification codes from the bank, followed within minutes by texts from Daniel to an unknown number saying variations of "done" and "move it." The unknown number belonged to Marcus Vale, Daniel's partner in Halcyon Ridge, and the registered agent for Northline Advisory Group. Daniel claimed the messages referred to property documents. Marcus claimed he could not remember. Then, Northline disappeared. Its office address was a rented mailbox. Its website went offline. Marcus stopped responding and retained a criminal attorney. The estate amended its filings to include claims for fraud and financial exploitation. Daniel told the family I had manufactured digital records with help from Priya. My mother believed him because accepting his story required only one villain. Accepting mine required her to reconsider a lifetime of choosing him. 6 weeks after the lawsuit began, I received a call from a woman named Camille Foster. She introduced herself as a retired probate judge and longtime friend of Grandma's. I recognized her name from holiday cards but had never met her. Camille asked me to come to her office alone. She said she possessed an item entrusted to her under written instructions. When I told Samuel, he smiled for the first time in weeks and said he had been waiting for that call. Camille's office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house. On her desk lay a blue envelope sealed with dark red wax. My name was written across the front in Grandma's hand. I reached for it, but Camille placed 2 fingers on the envelope and explained the conditions. Grandma had directed her not to release the letter until one of 3 events occurred. 90 days passed without a challenge. Daniel formally accused me of misconduct, or the estate recovered evidence connecting Northline to him. 2 conditions had now been met. The letter was not for me to open privately. It was to be read at a family meeting, recorded by a neutral videographer, with all beneficiaries invited. If anyone refused to attend, they would receive the recording. I asked why Grandma had created something so theatrical. Camille said my grandmother understood her audience. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at Grandma's house. Daniel objected, then agreed when he learned the letter might be evidence. He arrived with 2 attorneys. My mother came with Aunt Linda. Samuel, Priya, Camille, and a court reporter sat along one side of the dining table. The same relatives who had watched Daniel accuse me returned to watch a dead woman answer him. I sat in the chair nearest the window. The lilies were gone. Grandma's hydrangeas outside had turned from blue to faded green. Camille displayed the sealed envelope to the camera, opened it, and removed 12 handwritten pages. Before reading, she explained that she had watched Grandma write and sign the letter. 2 physicians had confirmed capacity that morning. A duplicate had been stored in Samuel's vault. Daniel's attorney asked whether the letter was testamentary. Camille said it did not alter the will. It explained it. Grandma began by addressing all of us. She wrote that love did not require equal trust, and equality did not always mean equal money. She knew her will would be called unfair by those who confused inheritance with wages owed for belonging to a family. She had made gifts based not on affection alone, but on need, conduct, and the likelihood that each gift would help rather than harm. She described my mother's income trust gently. Mom had always been generous and easily pressured, so Grandma wanted her safe from other people's emergencies. She described the charitable gifts and why they mattered. Then she addressed Daniel. She wrote that Daniel had asked her for a $2 million investment in Halcyon Ridge. She refused after reviewing the debt and inflated projections. He returned with new numbers. She refused again. He then asked for a loan secured by his future inheritance. She told him no person could borrow against love or against money that did not yet belong to him. After that conversation, funds began leaving her accounts. Daniel shifted in his chair. His attorney whispered to him. Camille continued. Grandma had suspected him after the first transfer, but she did not rely on suspicion. She asked Priya to preserve access logs and engaged investigators. She allowed one lightly funded account to remain accessible while moving most assets beyond online reach. It was a decoy. Every transfer Daniel initiated from it created a record. Every attempt to delete a message produced another copy in the backup system. The money he believed he was taking from her fortune was, after the first transaction, being advanced into an account monitored by investigators. The room changed. Relatives stopped looking at me and began looking at Daniel. Grandma wrote that she had offered him 3 chances to confess. The first came when she asked whether he knew Northline. The second came when she showed him a statement and said mistakes could be repaired if acknowledged. The third came when she told him her new fiduciary was reviewing all transactions. Each time he lied. After the third, he accused me of turning her against him. That accusation convinced her to change the structure of the will. Then the letter turned to me. Grandma wrote that I had not known the size of her estate and had never asked. She listed the $40,000 gift, explaining that it came from a separate account and was made after she reviewed my finances herself. She said I had tried to refuse it twice. She listed every reimbursement and attached corresponding receipts. She stated that I had never controlled her bank access, selected her doctors, or drafted her legal documents. She acknowledged that my presence had made her final years possible in her own home, but said the residue of the estate was not payment for care. Payment would reduce love to an invoice. She left it to me because stewardship required someone who could distinguish having access from having permission. I heard someone crying and realized it was my mother. Grandma was not finished. She addressed the accusation she predicted Daniel would make. If he told the family I had stolen the inheritance, she wrote, they should ask why he needed them to reach a verdict before seeing evidence. If he used her dementia diagnosis, they should remember that impairment was not emptiness and that old age did not make a person public property. If relatives accepted his story because it was easier than examining their own absence, that choice belonged to them, not to me. The final pages described a second inheritance no one expected. Grandma had placed controlling interests in the commercial properties and logistics shares into the Rose Mercer Foundation, a charitable entity created years earlier. I was not the owner. I had been named chair, subject to oversight by an independent board. The foundation would fund caregiver respite programs, legal aid for exploited seniors, and scholarships for women returning to work after family caregiving. I would receive a salary only if I chose to serve, and the board could remove me for misconduct. The estate residue passing to me personally was substantial, but far less than Daniel had announced. Most of the fortune had never been available for him to inherit. That revelation seemed to wound him more than the evidence. He had risked everything for money that was not there. Grandma ended with instructions concerning the stolen funds. If Daniel confessed before litigation, repaid the money, and entered treatment for compulsive gambling or financial risk behavior, his $200,000 gift would remain. If he accused an innocent person or forced the estate to defend the will, the gift would fund the foundation's legal aid program instead. She wrote that consequences were not revenge. They were boundaries that survived the person who set them. The last paragraph was addressed to me alone, though Camille read it aloud because Grandma had directed her to. She told me not to spend my life presenting evidence to people committed to misunderstanding me. She said the family might apologize when the truth became expensive, but an apology motivated by lost access was only another request. She asked me to build a table where care was not treated as women's invisible obligation. She wrote that I had been loved before I became useful and would remain worthy after I stopped rescuing anyone. Camille lowered the pages. For several seconds, the only sound was the camera's faint cooling fan. Then Daniel said the letter was fabricated. It was the worst response he could have chosen. His attorney closed his eyes. Samuel placed the duplicate letter, medical evaluations, witness affidavits, and a video recording on the table. Grandma had recorded herself reading the entire letter 2 days after writing it. Camille turned on a monitor. Grandma appeared seated in her library, small but alert, wearing the green cardigan I had mended twice. She stated the date, named everyone present behind the camera, and read with steady precision. When she reached Daniel's section, she paused and looked directly into the lens. She said she hoped he would make the letter unnecessary. Daniel left before the video ended. The family remained. No one knew how to move from certainty to shame without passing through silence. Aunt Linda was the first to speak. She apologized for believing the accusation. I asked whether she was sorry she believed it or sorry it was false. She looked down. My mother tried to embrace me. I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough to make the new boundary visible. My mother said Daniel had sounded so certain. I reminded her that I had sounded truthful. She said she had been afraid Grandma was vulnerable. I told her fear might explain why she asked questions, but not why she joined a lawsuit without asking me any. She cried harder. For years, tears had ended difficult conversations in our family by assigning everyone else the task of comforting her. This time, I let them belong to her. The letter changed the legal case but did not end it. Evidence still had to be authenticated. Daniel's attorneys withdrew from the will challenge after he refused their advice. He hired a smaller firm and claimed Marcus had acted alone. Marcus, facing federal bank fraud charges, accepted a cooperation agreement. He provided emails showing Daniel created Northline, directed transfers, and planned to replace the money after Halcyon Ridge sold out. He also produced messages discussing how to discredit me if Grandma discovered the withdrawals. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Elena is always around, so no one will question it. That line hurt in a different way. Daniel had not merely exploited my access to Grandma. He had exploited the family's assumptions about caregiving. He understood that invisible labor could be recast as secret control. He knew people would find it plausible that the woman who handled medications also handled money. He selected me as his defense before he committed the crime. The criminal investigation uncovered more. Daniel had forged Grandma's signature on the investment subscription. He had used her tablet to authorize transfers and intercepted verification codes by adding his number as a trusted device. The contractor payment funded improvements to a condominium owned by Marcus's sister, but used as a sales suite for Halcyon Ridge. In total, they diverted $384,000 and attempted to access another $600,000 after Priya froze the accounts. Daniel was arrested on a Tuesday morning outside his office. I learned from a news alert, not from family. The photograph showed him in a navy suit between two investigators, his expression offended rather than afraid. My mother called immediately and asked whether the estate could tell prosecutors we did not want charges. I explained that the victim had been Grandma and the decisions now belonged to authorities. Mom asked if I could at least pay Daniel's legal fees from my inheritance. I ended the call. The next few months stripped away the fantasy that truth repairs everything at once. My employer reinstated me and issued a letter clearing me, but several colleagues remained careful around me. Online corrections received a fraction of the attention the accusation had. Relatives posted vague messages about not judging until all facts were known, as though they had not already judged. Some apologized sincerely. Others apologized with explanations so long the apology disappeared inside them. I sold Grandma's house only after a year. Before listing it, I spent weeks sorting her belongings. I donated clothes, archived family photographs, and gave each relative the items specifically left to them. Daniel had been left Grandpa's brass desk clock. His attorney asked that it be shipped to the detention center's property office, but it was not permitted, so I stored it with Samuel. Even then, I followed instructions. Dependability did not vanish when I learned boundaries. It became a choice. Inside the desk's locked drawer, beneath the financial records, I found a smaller envelope addressed to me. This one was not legal evidence. It contained a grocery list, an old photograph of Grandma at 27, and a note only 6 lines long. She wrote that if I was reading it, the noise was probably over. She hoped I had discovered that silence after chaos could feel lonely before it felt peaceful. She told me to buy good shoes, take a trip without managing anyone's schedule, and stop keeping rubber bands if I did not need them. I laughed so suddenly I frightened myself. I accepted the position as chair of the Rose Mercer Foundation. The independent board included Camille, a geriatric social worker, a forensic accountant, a community banker, and a former family caregiver named Tessa Nguyen. Our first grant funded emergency legal representation for seniors whose relatives had gained unauthorized account access. Our second created weekend respite care for low-income families. I insisted that caregivers be paid for training sessions and advisory work. No one would be thanked in place of being compensated. The personal inheritance changed my life quietly. I paid off my apartment, invested conservatively, and reduced my hours at the healthcare company. I did not buy a mansion or post photographs designed to prove I had won. The most extravagant thing I did was spend a month in Portugal alone. On the third day, I caught myself planning excursions based on what Grandma could have managed physically. Then I remembered I was the only person on the schedule. I took a train north simply because I wanted to see the river. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to wire fraud, financial exploitation of an elder, and conspiracy. The sentencing hearing took place 18 months after Grandma's death. I attended because the prosecutor asked me to give a statement about the impact of his actions. Daniel's attorney described him as a devoted grandson under extraordinary business pressure. He presented letters from my mother and several relatives. They wrote about his generosity, his leadership, and the shame he had suffered. When it was my turn, I did not ask for the maximum sentence. I described the practical harm, the stolen money, the legal costs, the damage to Grandma's final months, and the public accusation that threatened my career. Then I described what could not be itemized. Daniel had turned care into evidence of guilt. He had taught our family to treat proximity as motive and confidence as truth. He had forced a dying woman to build a case against her own grandson because he would not accept her no. Daniel looked at me only once. His face held the same expression he wore when Camille revealed the foundation. He still believed the central tragedy was that the money had escaped him. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and ordered restitution. Halcyon Ridge entered foreclosure. Investors sued Daniel and Marcus. The development was sold to another company at a loss. My mother sold her vacation property to help pay Daniel's unrelated debts, even though her trust protected her living expenses. I did not intervene. 6 months into his sentence, Daniel wrote me a letter. It was 8 pages long. He said prison had given him time to think. He apologized for how things unfolded and said fear had driven him to make choices he regretted. He wrote that Grandma's will had made him feel discarded and that my closeness with her had always made him feel second. He asked me to authorize the foundation to forgive the remaining restitution because the debt would prevent him from rebuilding his life. I read the letter twice. There was no sentence saying he had stolen the money, no sentence saying he had framed me, no acknowledgement that Grandma had offered him help before he chose deception. His apology treated harm like weather, something that had unfolded around him. I placed it in a folder and did not respond. My mother was furious. She said forgiveness did not require forgetting. I agreed. I told her forgiveness also did not require renewed access, financial relief, or pretending an incomplete apology was complete. She accused me of becoming hard. For once, I did not defend my character. I asked whether she would call a man hard for refusing to pay the debt of the person who framed him. She had no answer. Our relationship did not end, but it changed shape. We met in public places. I no longer handled her taxes, insurance appeals, or travel arrangements. When she mentioned a problem, I listened without automatically solving it. At first, she interpreted this as punishment. Over time, she learned to ask directly for help and accept that I might say no. That small change did more to repair us than any emotional speech could have. Some relatives returned gradually. Aunt Linda became one of the foundation's most reliable volunteers after completing training and background checks like everyone else. She never asked for special treatment. My cousins invited me back to the group chat, but I declined. I had discovered that family connection did not need a digital room where the fastest story became the truth. I preferred individual relationships that could survive questions. On the 2nd anniversary of Grandma's death, the foundation opened the Rose House Caregiver Center in a renovated building near the hospital. It offered legal clinics, counseling, respite coordination, and quiet rooms where caregivers could sleep for a few hours. We placed no portrait of Grandma in the lobby because she disliked being watched while people worked. Instead, we framed a line from her letter. Care is not proof that someone owes you everything. It is proof that what they gave should not be made invisible. At the opening, a reporter asked whether the center was my response to my brother. I told her it was my response to my grandmother. Revenge would have kept Daniel at the center of the story. Grandma had spent her final strength designing something larger than his betrayal. I was not interested in shrinking it back down. After the guests left, I stood alone in the lobby and opened the copy of Grandma's letter I carried in my bag. The paper had softened along the folds. I reread the final paragraph about being loved before I became useful. For most of my life, usefulness had been the price of my place in the family. Daniel's accusation nearly destroyed me because it attacked the role I believed made me worthy. If I was not dependable, generous, and endlessly available, I did not know who I was. The inheritance changed that, but not because of the money. Money gave me choices, legal protection, and time. The letter gave me permission to stop auditioning for belief. Grandma had not left me a fortune because I was the daughter who sacrificed most. She had entrusted me with responsibility because I understood limits, including the limit of what love could excuse. 3 years after the funeral, Daniel was released early to a halfway house. He requested a meeting through our mother. I almost refused, then agreed under conditions: a public place, 1 hour, no discussion of money, and no expectation of reconciliation. He arrived thinner, with gray at his temples. The charm was still there, but it no longer filled the space around him. He said he had spent years hating me for receiving what he believed should have been his. He admitted using Grandma's phone, moving the money, and planning to repay it. He admitted choosing me as the scapegoat because the family already resented how much time I spent with her. Then he said the sentence I had waited years to hear. He knew I had not stolen anything, and he told everyone I had because he thought destroying my credibility would save him. The admission did not produce the release I once imagined. It was simply true, finally spoken. I thanked him for saying it. He asked whether we could begin again. I told him beginnings do not erase records. We could build a limited relationship if his actions remained honest, but I would not offer access to the foundation, my finances, or my private life. He nodded. When the check arrived, he paid for his own coffee. Before we left, Daniel asked a question that revealed how differently we still remembered the same family. He wanted to know when Grandma had stopped loving him. I told him she had not. That was what made her choices so difficult. She had protected herself from him, documented his crimes, and denied him control without pretending affection had disappeared. He seemed unable to understand that love and access could be separated. In our family, love had always been measured by doors left open, bills paid, mistakes absorbed, and consequences postponed. Grandma's final act had rejected that measurement. She loved him enough to leave a path back through confession, but not enough to sacrifice another person to keep him comfortable. Daniel stared through the cafe window and said he had always believed the inheritance would prove which of us mattered more. I told him that belief had been the trap. Grandma's money could distribute property, but it could not rank grandchildren. He had turned the will into a scoreboard before he knew what it contained, then committed crimes to protect the score he thought he deserved. I had made a different mistake. I treated usefulness as my score and believed that if I cared perfectly, no one could question my goodness. His lie destroyed that illusion. It also freed me from it. When I stood to leave, he asked whether Grandma had mentioned him near the end. I remembered her last weeks, the way she looked toward the driveway when a car slowed, the birthday card she kept on the mantel, the photograph of Daniel at 12 tucked inside her Bible. I told him yes. She had worried that he would confuse shame with being unloved and use that confusion as permission to become worse. She hoped he would eventually learn that accepting consequences was not the same as being abandoned. He covered his face for a moment. I did not reach across the table. Compassion no longer required me to interrupt every painful feeling. When he lowered his hands, he thanked me. That gratitude, small and unpolished, sounded more honest than the 8-page apology he had sent from prison. For the next year, he sent occasional messages without asking for favors. He found salaried work with a construction supplier that knew his history. He made restitution payments. He apologized directly to relatives for recruiting them into his lie. Some forgave him. Others did not. I watched from a distance. Change, Grandma had taught me, was a pattern, not a performance. I keep the original blue envelope in a fireproof box. The letter itself belongs to the estate archive, but Camille gave me the envelope after the case closed. The wax seal is broken, and Daniel's accusation has long since vanished beneath newer scandals online. Yet sometimes I hold that envelope and remember the room before it was opened. The highlighted statements, the suspicious faces, the terrible loneliness of knowing the truth without being able to prove it fast enough. Then I remember what happened after. Evidence did not shout. It accumulated. Grandma's notebook, the trusted device, the cloud backup, Marcus's messages, the physicians, the video, and finally the letter all formed a structure stronger than Daniel's certainty. The people who loved the spectacle of his accusation had to sit through the slower work of truth. If there is a lesson in what Grandma left, it is not that every lie is exposed, or every family chooses justice. Some relatives never apologized. Some people still remember the headline better than the correction. Daniel's confession cannot return Grandma's final months or erase the way my mother looked at me across that dining table. Truth did not restore the old family because the old family depended on my silence and Daniel's performance. It built something else. It built a life in which my care is chosen, not extracted. It built a foundation where invisible work becomes visible support. It built a relationship with my mother that has boundaries instead of emergencies, and perhaps the beginning of an honest relationship with a brother I no longer need to rescue or defeat. Most of all, it built a version of me who can be misunderstood without disappearing. My brother told everyone I stole Grandma's inheritance. For a while, everyone believed him. Grandma's final letter proved I had not taken her money, her mind, or her choices. But its greatest gift was not clearing my name. It was reminding me that my name had always belonged to me, even when the people at the table were willing to trade it for an easier story.